powerful than that going on, an implicit trust that when you come to the table and present on a matter, that we're going to come away as satisfied as we could be as an audience. And because we live in the society we live in, and the incentive structure that prevails in society, the way to demonstrate that is dollars. That's the only thing anybody respects, is if someone's willing to pay for something, then it becomes real. And so we said, fuck it, fine. Let's put a price tag on it. Mm-hmm. And every time we up our price tag, every time we up our ante, we counterbalance that with increased effort. Yeah. And the second that increased effort isn't matched with increased money, we step back. Because this isn't some kind of, we're not desperate for any of this. This is a burden we carry. When you give us money, you're giving us confidence, but you're also making us sacrifice in our personal lives. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're adding pain to the load.
Yeah, it's a trade-off we don't make lightly, but it's the only reason to do this shit.
Yeah. Well, see, this is a topic that has come up on the show before, and it seems to be a theme that will move forward as I talk to more and more people, and that is this: it can be both. And I think people have such a weird block in their brains that they don't want to think about a monetary transaction taking place because it makes it bad or wrong or for the wrong reason or it's not genuine for some reason.
People are afraid. People are afraid. I know this because of my own. When we created the tier for Under the Cinemat, I was afraid. I was afraid because I came up with this idea, and if people don't subscribe to it, it's a failure. And what I've come up with is not a good idea. There's a lot of fear in that. And the idea that if you are going to charge money for something that you create, you are running the risk of failure.
Absolutely.
Of people not buying
Look,
it.
I can tell you, I got to cut you off, boss, because you're really sparking something in me. I happen to know that there are people with significant public profiles and significant exposure on real television who have done podcasts who do not want to start a Patreon because they're afraid of what it will tell them about the true nature of their following. That really no one gives a fuck about them. And they don't give enough of a fuck about them to pay for the work they're putting in. And that bleeds into your work. I mean, when you know that you're shouting into the ether, you know that when you don't have a proof point to say this is landing, this is valuable to people. I wish there was another way to measure this than dollars. In a way, I do. But, look, that's the way things work. That's the way momentum gets built, is when people perceive that people are willing to pay for something, then they start to wonder why, and then they get involved, and then they become your next customer, and it goes on and on and on. And it's kind of like it's still not enough to justify, as much as we pull, it's still not a full-time living in and of itself. It sort of depends on what lane you're in life, but you got to consider that it's not just one person getting all that money, or the money. I shouldn't say all that money. It's almost insulting to suggest that this is some kind of windfall, but it's something other than that. It's a necessary proof point. You said, Gabe, it can be both. It can be a passion project and a moneymaker. I'm here to tell you it has to be both.
Has to be. I love it.
I totally agree with that. And also, I mean, let's also be completely honest. It's not like that this just was how we started. This is what the Patreon is now is 7 years of extreme hard work, of extreme ridicule from loved ones. My wife, for a long time was like, what, she's like, this is not important. You shouldn't be you have other things you need to do. And I'm like, no, this is important. This is great. What we're, this is going to be something. And, I mean, when we first started it, we were, being distributed by a website. And what were they doing? Like paying us $25 a week?
Yeah, it was like a freelance fee. It was just like, and they wouldn't even want to pay us that.
Yeah. And they didn't. And then when push came to shove and we were kind of approaching a certain point, they're like, yeah, we're not going to pay anymore. And so we're like, all right, well, fuck you.
Gotta do something. We gotta have something to show for this. For guys,
right?
Look, I think Boss's point is well taken. Until it hits that fucking direct deposit, nobody gets it. Yeah. And we get it, right? Because we know that we're being fulfilled in a fundamental way by doing the show. But nobody gets it until you see that number. Fine. You make the rules, we'll play by them.
Yeah. See, it's the other thing here is the idea of that contract, and nothing worth getting is nothing free is worth getting, right? Like the idea of
absolutely
the idea of if I'm going to pay for a Patreon membership and this is it again, you're engendering need, right? It goes back to that idea of a contract where I'm going to pay for this, now I need it. And that's just it. You guys talk a lot on the shows, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but about the folks who are freeloaders, right, versus the folks who pony up. And what good is 50,000 people or 150,000 downloads a month or whatever if you're not seeing anything for the work that you're putting into it? And that is not what I desperately want to break down through the course of this show, is that is not about selfishness or greed. It is about understanding the value of one's work.
Yeah. We used to say when we were doing the Sonco show in college, we would often say to each other, we're not here to make everyone laugh. We're here for that one person who's going to jump up, who's going to run to the roof and just scream at the top of his lungs and scream about our show. And that's that's kind of the same mentality. Is what good is 50,000 people who who are listening to your show but aren't really, there's no value coming in for you for your hard work. There's no transaction there. I'll gladly do it for the for the 1,200 plus patrons that we have.
It's just that's what keeps you going. You can germinate an idea and do it for nothing and get tremendous benefit from it. But there's a certain wall you hit when that's the extent of the reward you get. It's just a reality of modern life. Mm-hmm. You can't put that much hours into something to make it worth listening to if it doesn't pay back for your time. Time is money. That's a shoot. So there comes a certain point where the math is off and the effort sunk the audience isn't telling you that it's worth the effort. And that could be for a million reasons. That could be because you didn't market correctly. That could be because you didn't strike the right chord. But when we go on the air and we call someone a freeloader, we're not pointing at that person and criticizing them. We're calling someone a freeloader to praise the people who do pay. Yeah. It's a form of paying tribute to them for realizing that in this life, to exactly what you said, Gabe, until you pay for something, you're not worth the time to cater to. Like, no one could ever blame us. And because we have that solid direct customer support, we can go out into the wiles of the digital advertising landscape, confident that we can name our price and we can take or leave sponsors as they come, take or leave advertising as it comes. We're happy to have it, but not only do we not need it, it's because we know our fans are with us no matter what, mm-hmm. that we can conduct ourselves in a way that's respectful of the work we put in and not desperate for this sort of false brass ring of mass audience. Yep. Equals a living in podcasting. It does not. I mean, you just don't get enough. You don't get enough of a piece of the pie in the programmatic advertising side. You just don't.
No, not at all. Speaking of getting the value that you're worth, I want to talk about some of the hard work, the other hard work that JP puts in before we get rolling a little bit further here. But I want to talk about the lapsed canon and how that plays into the loyalty that you're able to bring to the show from your fans. I mean, at this point, JP, I tried to look for a comprehensive list. I sourced a lot of folks, but I mean, I don't believe that it's less than 200 or 300 different characters that you voice.
The Rogues Gallery. I honestly, I don't say this lightly. I don't say this really, except that I genuinely think of it to be true, is Simpson sized.
It's true.
I think it's that fucking large. There are so many bizarre characters that we have come up with. And I'm sorry, what was your question?
Oh, no. I hadn't gotten to a question yet.
Oh, all right.
Basically, it was just me talking about the lapsed canon and all these characters that you voice. The question that I was going to get to, though, was, look, a lot of this stuff you can tell by listening is kind of a happy accident. But do you kind of as you're producing as you're preparing for a show, and you're putting notes together, you ever come across a character and go, you know what, I've never done that. Let's try that.
It's rare.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare, but there are sometimes, and there's actually two funny sides of this. Sometimes there are moments when I'm like, if I don't write this down, I'm not going to remember it. And I know that. I know that I will forget it. Like, for example, when I think of one of the early Starcades shows that we did, I saw Gordon Soley wearing a pinky ring. And I was like, oh, shit. He's wearing like this guy. What the fuck is this guy?
For the uninitiated, I am going to include a link to a picture of Gordon Soley in the show notes.
Yeah. And this guy is, this mild-mannered, the announcer, just the, nerdiest kind of guy you could possibly imagine. But for some reason, that pinky ring transformed my vision of him, completely transformed it. And it made me think of this guy he's mild-mannered, wrestling announcer during the day, but this guy's a fucking pimp at night.
The dude fucks. It's that simple.
Yeah, that's exactly it. He just he doesn't smile. He doesn't fucking need it. He wants it, and he will get it. He goes out. The guy doesn't sleep. I swear to God, he doesn't sleep more than 4 hours a week. He goes out. He fucks all night long. He drinks. He does drugs.
Yeah.
He can just sit there in his fucking lounge chair while women dance for him, and it will happen. And then he'll go to work the next day like nothing fucking happened.
And look,
and he will do his job.
What's so key for people to understand is that these character traits, we don't bake them up in an idea room and bring them to you fully baked.
No.
You hear the writer's room.
Yeah.
You hear us invent these character traits. We don't polish it and deliver it to you. You're there when we discover that. How funny would it be not only that Gordon Soley fucks, but that he goes to work the next day like nothing happened.
Right. But aside from a rarity like that, most often I'm sitting there as I'm writing my notes for the show, and keep in mind, I average about an 8 to 10 page script as I'm watching the wrestling show. And I'm sitting there and I'll often be looking, I'm like, there's nothing funny. Like, I'm not writing anything funny. And it takes me a moment to realize, well, yeah, because most of the stuff that you're going to find funny is when you start, bouncing stuff off Jack. And that's when it'll happen. And it'll be a random moment where Jack is unveiling some kind of history that happened that is completely either not ludicrous or ludicrous. It doesn't have to be. And it'll just spark something in me. And I'm like, okay, I got to go someplace with this. I don't know where I'm going to end up, but I got to go someplace with this.
Where did you discover that you had this talent for voices? Because folks, I don't know how to emphasize this enough. If you don't just pick any episode after, let's say, the first 10 episodes that they ever did, and just listen randomly